Hello, my name is Noah Abji, and today we're going to learn how to write numerical expressions given situations. So first, what exactly is a numerical expression? Well, a numerical expression is a mathematical statement that only has numbers and operation symbols. So let's look at a few examples to piece and break down this definition. So here are some examples of numerical expressions listed below. Each of these five are numerical expressions. Now, the reason why is because if we look at their definition, all of these are mathematical statements, which means that there's math going on in them, but they only have numbers and operation symbols. In the first one, we have the number 3 and 8, and our operation symbol means we're just doing something to those 3 and the 8, which is adding them with a plus. In the second one, we're multiplying 7 and 2 and adding 9. In the third, we're subtracting 3/5 from 4. In the fourth, we're multiplying 3 and x and then subtracting 4. And in the fifth, we're multiplying 2 and x and plus 17. Now, an expression is different than an equation. Equations have equal symbols and actually say this is going to be equal to some number. In this case, it would be 3 and 2/5. But an expression doesn't have those equal symbols, which is what makes it different from an equation. All we have are numbers and operations that we're doing to those numbers. So why do we use numerical expressions? Well, it's because we can use them to represent different scenarios that involve numbers. So here's an example of that. If we wanted to represent the difference between 3 and 7 as an expression, we can represent that as 7 minus 3. 7 minus 3, because minus means the difference between, and then 7 minus 3. 7 and 3 is written here. So we're going to learn exactly how to write those expressions when we're given situations. All right, so how do we write those expressions given situations? Well, it's all in the words. Our sentences that tell us what the expressions are give us all the key words in order to write those expressions. Some of the key words that you absolutely need to know are sum of, which means you're adding two numbers. So if you find the sum of 2 and 3, you're adding 2 and 3. The difference between means you're subtracting two numbers. Now the order does matter. If it's the difference between 10 and 7, that means you're subtracting 7 from 10, which would be 10 minus 7. It's always the first number minus the second number. Quotient of means you're dividing, and in this case is similar to difference between, where the order matters. So if it was the quotients of 10 and 7, that would mean 10 divided by 7. It means you're dividing the first number by the second number. And finally, product of means that you're multiplying two numbers together. So an example would be the product of 5 and 8 would be 5 times 8. Some other words you may need to know are add, subtract, multiply, divide, times, twice, split, more than, less than, greater than, and take away. I know that's a lot of words, but when you get to questions, you can logically think about what each of these may mean, and you'll be able to write a numerical expression. But the four words above, sum of, difference of, quotient, and product of, are the specific terms that are representing each of the different operations. So let's look at a few examples using these words to write numerical expressions. So the first one is 10 greater than the quotient of 8 and 2. So in this expression, we have two parts, 10 greater than and the quotient of 8 and 2. And each of these is doing two different things. So first, 10 greater than means it's going to be 10 more than, or 10 plus. So 10 plus the quotient of 8 and 2 is the same as 10 greater than the quotient of 8 and 2. If you think about it logically, greater than means that you should be adding something, because adding makes numbers bigger. So next, the quotient of 8 and 2. So remember, quotient is one of those terms that we just got taught. And so the quotient of 8 and 2 would be 8 divided by 2, because it's always the first number being divided by the second number. So 10 greater than the quotient of 8 and 2, if we put these two together, would be 10 plus 8 divided by 2. Another example is the product of 8 and x minus 5. And I should add a comma here. So the product of 8 and x minus 5. So first, we have to break this into two parts. The product of 8 and x, and then minus 5. So the minus 5 we can put in right away. Minus 5, and what are we subtracting 5 from? Well, we're subtracting it from the product of 8 and x. Remember, product means we're multiplying. So 8 and x being multiplied is 8x. When you have a variable such as x, you can just write 8x to represent 8 times x. So 8x minus 5 is the product of 8 and x minus 5. And finally, for this last example, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to break the expression up into groups and then write that out. So our groups are add 5 to 7 times, add 5 to 7 times, and then the difference between y and 6. So if we're thinking about it logically, the first thing we should write out is add 5, because this is going to be on the outside. We're adding 5 to what? Well, we're adding it to 7 times the difference between y and 6. So add 5 is the last thing we're going to do, so we're just going to write it out first so we have it there. So now we're doing 7 times the difference between y and 6. So we're multiplying 7 by something. Well, what are we multiplying it by? We're multiplying it by the difference between y and 6. So we can do 5 plus 7 times, and then the difference between y and 6. So the difference between y and 6, it's one of our terms. That means that we're subtracting 6 from y, or y minus 6. Now, if you wrote this out, there's one problem that you would have. And that problem is, if you're to do order of operations, this would be 5 plus, and you'd have to do 7 times y first, and then subtract 6. But that's not what we want. Our expression says we're multiplying 7 by the difference between y and 6. So if y were 10, the difference between y and 6 would be 4, and we would be multiplying 7 by 4, not 7 times 10. So in order to make sure we can represent that, we have to put parentheses around y minus 6 to say, hey, this means that we should do the difference between y and 6 first, because whatever is inside a parentheses goes first. So that way we're doing 7 times, and we do the difference between y and 6 first, and then add 5 to all of that. All right, so now let's do some review questions. If you'd like to try them, I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video before I explain the answer. So here are the numerical expressions that are the answers to these 3 sentences where you have to write the expressions for them. 2x minus 5, 7 divided by x minus 3, and 2 times 14 plus y. So let's start on the first one. The difference between 3 times x and 5. So we're finding the difference between two things. So if we break this into a group, it's the difference between, and then 3 times x and 5. So remember, when we have the difference between, we always have 2 numbers that we're finding that difference between. The second number is just 5 because it comes after the and. But the first number is 3 times x, which means this is the part we need to do first. So 3 times x is 3x. And then our second number is 5. And remember, we're finding the difference between them. That means we're subtracting, and it's always the first number minus the second number. So it's 3 times x minus 5. So 3 times x minus 5 is 3x minus 5. And I realized I made a mistake here. This should actually say 3x instead of 2x. Next, 3 less than the quotient of 7 and x. So if we break this up into groups, we have 3 less than, and then the quotient of 7 and x. So remember, we're doing 3 less than what? Well, 3 less than the quotient of 7 and x. So it's something minus 3. because it's 3 less than, and less than means subtraction because you're making a number smaller or making it lesser. And then it's less than the quotient of 7 and x. Quotient means we're dividing, so that means it's the first number, 7, divided by the second number, which is x. 7 divided by x, and now if we combine those two, it's the quotient of 7 and x, which is 7 divided by x minus 3. So 3 less than the quotient of 7 and x. And finally, the third one is 2 times the sum of 14 and y. Break it up into groups. It's 2 times, and then the sum of 14 and y. So we're multiplying 2 by something. What are we multiplying it by? Well, we're multiplying it by the sum of 14 and y. So it's 2 times, and then the sum of 14 and y. Remember, sum means addition. So we add 14 and y. So 14 plus y. Now, if you were to leave it like this would be incorrect, because this would mean 2 times 14 plus y. But we want to multiply 2 by the sum of 14 and y. So 2 times 14 plus y. If we use order of operations, we do this part first, and we don't want that. So again, we need to add parentheses to signal we want to add 14 and y first. So it is 2 times the sum of 14 and y. That's all, and thank you for watching.